Hey guys, when we think of World War One, we imagine a nightmare of mud, barbed wire, and endless artillery barrages. We picture the Western Front as a landscape of pure horror, where millions of young men were sent to their deaths in a conflict that seemed to have no purpose beyond grinding each other into dust. We see it as the war that killed the old world and ushered in the modern age of industrial slaughter. The trenches, the gas attacks, the wholesale destruction of an entire generation. These are the images that define the Great War in our collective memory. But there was one moment, one brief and extraordinary moment in the winter of 1914 when something impossible happened. The guns fell silent, the soldiers climbed out of their trenches, and enemies who had been trying to kill each other just hours before met in the middle of no man's land to shake hands, exchange gifts, sing carols together, and even play football. It was called the Christmas Truce, and it was one of the most remarkable events in the history of warfare. It was not planned by generals, it was not ordered by politicians, it was not part of any military strategy. It was a spontaneous uprising of human decency in the midst of industrial horror, a moment when ordinary men, far from home and facing almost certain death, chose compassion over conflict. It happened in dozens of places along the Western Front, involving tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides. And then, almost as quickly as it began, it was over, suppressed by the high command and never repeated on the same scale again. Tonight, we will step back into that frozen December and experience what it was like to be there. We will see how ordinary soldiers, cold, exhausted, and far from home, spontaneously created a moment of peace in the midst of unimaginable violence. We'll learn about the songs they sang, the gifts they exchanged, the football matches they played, the burials they conducted together, and the fragile trust that emerged between men who had been taught to hate each other. We'll understand why it happened in 1914 and why it could never happen again, and we'll explore what this extraordinary event tells us about the nature of war, humanity, and the thin line between enemy and friend. But before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. So, I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to the frozen trenches of Belgium in December 1914. To a Christmas unlike any other in human history. Our story does not begin with peace. It begins with the violent birth of a new kind of war. Let us imagine that you are a British soldier, a private in your early 20s, part of the British Expeditionary Force. Your regiment arrived in Belgium in the late summer of 1914 with high spirits and confident expectations. Everyone said the war would be over by Christmas. That had been the promise. A quick, decisive campaign, a glorious victory, and then home to England for the new year. But it is now late December and you are still here, and the war is nothing like what you were promised. It is not glorious, it is not quick, and it shows no sign of ending anytime soon. You are standing in a trench, a deep, narrow ditch carved into the Belgian soil. The walls around you are shored up with wooden boards and sandbags, but the constant rain has turned the floor into a thick, sucking mud that pulls at your boots with every step. The air is heavy with the smell of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and the faint, sickening sweetness of decay that you've learned to ignore. Your uniform, once a proud khaki, is now caked in dried mud and grime. Your boots are never dry, your feet ache with the constant cold and dampness, and you know that trench foot, a painful condition where the flesh begins to rot from prolonged exposure to wet conditions, is a constant threat. Above you, stretched across the top of the trench in both directions, is a tangled barrier of barbed wire. Beyond that lies no man's land, a stretch of churned, cratered earth anywhere from 50 to 300 yards wide, depending on where you are along the line. It is a nightmarish landscape of mud, broken tree stumps, unexploded shells, and the occasional horrifying sight of a body, British or German, that no one has been able to retrieve. And on the other side of no man's land, barely visible through the morning mist, are the German trenches, an almost identical system of ditches, sandbags, and wire filled with men just like you. This is the Western Front in December 1914, a continuous line of fortifications stretching over 400 miles from the North Sea coast of Belgium all the way down to the Swiss border. Millions of men packed into these miserable ditches, locked in a brutal stalemate. Neither side can advance, neither side will retreat, and so you wait, endure, and survive. Your day begins long before dawn. You are woken by the sergeant, a gruff, experienced career soldier who moves through the trench, shaking men awake with a rough hand and a sharp command. This is stand to, the most dangerous time of day. At dawn and dusk, when visibility is poor and shadows play tricks on exhausted eyes, both sides expect an attack. It is military doctrine. It is when the enemy is most likely to come. Every man must be awake, rifle loaded, bayonet fixed, standing on the fire step, a narrow ledge built into the front wall of the trench, peering over the parapet into the grey, misty expanse of no man's land. You stand there, shivering violently in the pre-dawn cold, your breath misting in thick clouds before your face. Your hands are numb, almost useless, wrapped around the cold metal of your rifle. You flex your fingers repeatedly, trying to maintain some feeling, some ability to pull the trigger if needed. Your eyes water from the biting wind that sweeps across the open ground. You strain them into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement in the gloom. Any shape that might be a German soldier creeping forward for a dawn raid. The minutes crawl past with agonizing slowness. Your legs begin to ache from standing motionless. Your back protests. The cold seems to seep deeper into your bones with each passing moment. You become acutely aware of every sound. The creak of wooden boards, the rustle of another soldier shifting position, the distant cough from somewhere down the line, the faint whistle of wind through the barbed wire. Any of these sounds could be the prelude to an attack, or they could be nothing. You've learned that war is mostly waiting, watching, and being afraid of things that never happen. As the dawn light slowly spreads across the sky, painting it in shades of pearl and grey, the landscape of no man's land gradually reveals itself. It is the same desolate vista as yesterday and the day before that. Churned mud, frozen now into hard, uneven ridges and furrows. Shell craters filled with stagnant, ice-crusted water. Tangles of barbed wire, some upright on wooden stakes, some collapsed into rusting heaps. The broken, skeletal stumps of what were once trees, shattered by artillery fire, and here and there the heartbreaking sight that never gets easier to see. Bodies, British, German, and French, men who fell in failed attacks weeks or even months ago and have never been retrieved. They lie in frozen, grotesque positions, slowly becoming part of the landscape. No attack comes this morning. The German trenches, barely 200 yards away across this wasteland, remain silent. The sergeant finally calls the all clear, and you step down from the fire step with a grunt of relief. Your legs are stiff and aching. You stamp your feet, trying to restore circulation, tiny needles of pain shooting through your toes as the blood reluctantly returns. Breakfast is a meagre affair. You join the queue at the small, sheltered alcove where the company cook has managed to get a fire going. The smoke rises in a thin column, hopefully dispersing before it reaches high enough to draw the attention of German artillery spotters. You receive a tin mug of strong, bitter tea, brewed to the colour and consistency of motor oil, and a hard biscuit, similar to the ship's biscuit that sailors have endured for centuries. The tea is scalding hot, almost painful to drink, but you gulp it down anyway, desperate for the warmth. The biscuit is rock hard. You dunk it in your tea to soften it enough to chew, fishing out the occasional weevil, the small black beetles that infest the flour stores. You've long since stopped being disgusted by them. Protein is protein. The rest of the day is filled with work, endless, back-breaking work. The trenches are not static. They are living, or perhaps more accurately, dying, structures that require constant maintenance. The walls, built up from sandbags and wooden boards, are constantly eroding. Rain, when it comes, washes away the soil. The wooden supports rot. The sandbags split open, spilling their contents. Left unattended, a trench will collapse in on itself within a matter of weeks. You spend hours reinforcing the walls, filling the heavy burlap sacks with mud, your hands raw and blistered from the rough fabric, stacking them in precise overlapping rows according to the sergeant's exacting standards. Hammering in wooden stakes to shore up weak sections. The work is monotonous, mind-numbing, but you welcome it in a strange way. When you're working, you're not thinking. You're not dwelling on the fear, the cold, the misery, or the very real possibility that you might not survive the week. You dig drainage ditches, narrow channels carved into the floor of the trench, designed to funnel the endless water away from the living areas. But the water always wins. It seeps up from the ground. It runs in from the sides. It pools in every depression. The duckboards, the slatted wooden walkways that keep you out of the deepest mud, are constantly shifting, sinking, and needing replacement. You haul new boards from the supply dumps in the rear, heavy, unwieldy planks of wood that you must carry through the narrow, winding communication trenches that connect the front line to the support areas behind. You clean your rifle obsessively, as you have been trained to do. You strip it down to its component parts, wiping each piece clean of mud, moisture, and oil. You inspect the mechanism with a careful eye, checking for any sign of rust or damage. You oil it with precise amounts of lubricant, reassemble it, and then repeat the entire process an hour later. This rifle is your life. A jammed weapon in the moment of battle is a death sentence. Every soldier knows the stories of men who died because their rifle failed them at the crucial moment. And always, constantly, permeating every moment of every day, there is the fear. Even during the quiet moments, the boring moments, the moments when nothing is happening, the threat of death is ever present. It lurks in the back of your mind. A constant low-grade terror that you've learned to live with but never to ignore. There is the sniper, somewhere across no man's land, invisible and patient. A German marksman watches your section of trench through a telescopic sight. He has all day. He can wait. He's looking for someone to make the fatal mistake of exposing their head for too long, of standing in the same place for too many seconds, of creating a pattern that can be predicted and exploited. You've seen it happen. You were standing next to Private Cooper just 3 days ago when it happened. He stood up to stretch his back, complaining about the ache in his shoulders. There was a sharp crack, a sound almost like a twig snapping, and he fell. No cry, no scream, just a quiet collapse. When you rolled him over, there was a neat, small hole in his forehead, just above his right eye, and a much larger, messier exit wound in the back of his skull. He was dead before he hit the ground. You learn, Very quickly, to keep your head down, you learn to move in a crouch, bent almost double. You learn to accept that the world above the trench, the world of open air and sky, is a place of instant death. Then there is the artillery. The sound of the shells is something you will never forget, not for as long as you live. First, there is the distant thump of the German guns firing, a sound that carries for miles across the flat Belgian countryside. Your stomach clenches with dread the moment you hear it. You know what's coming. Then comes the whistling, that terrible, high-pitched shriek that grows louder and louder as the shell arcs through the sky toward you. It's the most terrifying sound in the world because you never know where it's going to land. Will it fall short, exploding harmlessly in no man's land? Will it overshoot, landing in the support trenches behind you? Or will this be the one with your name on it? The waiting is torture. The whistle builds and builds until it fills your entire world. Men crouch down, pressing themselves against the trench walls, covering their heads with their hands as if that will make any difference. And then the explosion. The earth shakes violently beneath your feet. The concussive blast hits you like a physical blow to the chest, driving the air from your lungs. Mud, debris, and fragments of shattered wood rain down from the sky, pattering against your helmet, your shoulders, your back. Your ears ring with a high whining tone that drowns out all other sound for several long seconds. If you're unlucky, catastrophically unlucky, the shell lands directly in your trench. When that happens, men simply cease to exist. They are obliterated in an instant of fire and shrapnel, blown apart so completely that sometimes there's nothing left to bury. You've seen it. You've helped collect the remains, such as they were. And you've learned not to think too hard about what you're doing. You just do the job and try not to remember. If you're lucky, and luck is a relative term in the trenches, the shell lands in no man's land, adding another crater to the moonscape. The explosion throws up a fountain of mud, smoke, and debris. When it settles, there's a new hole in the ground, perhaps 10 feet across and 6 feet deep, slowly filling with water. By tomorrow, it will be just another feature of the landscape, indistinguishable from the hundreds of others. This is your life. Day after day after day, a grinding, exhausting routine of fear, cold, mud, and boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. The grand strategic goals of the war, the complex web of alliances and treaties that led to this conflict, the speeches about honor and duty and defending civilization, all of it has become abstract and meaningless. Your world has shrunk to the 10-foot wide trench you occupy, the 50-yard section that your platoon is responsible for holding. Your only concern, your only goal, is surviving until tomorrow, and then surviving the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as this war lasts, which everyone said would be until Christmas, but which is now looking like it might go on much, much longer. But as December progresses and Christmas approaches, something begins to shift, both in the weather and in the mood of the men. The change starts gradually, almost imperceptibly. The endless cold rain that has defined every day since October finally begins to ease. The heavy, leaden clouds that have hung over the battlefield like a shroud start to break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky for the first time in weeks. And then, one night in mid-December, the temperature drops sharply. By morning, everything has changed. A hard frost has settled over the battlefield, a killing frost that transforms the landscape overnight. The endless, sucking mud that has been the defining feature of trench life. The thick, clinging paste that pulls at your boots and soaks through every layer of clothing suddenly solidifies. It freezes into hard, iron ridges and furrows, solid and unyielding beneath your feet. For the first time in weeks, months even, you can walk without sinking ankle-deep into the muck. You can move without the constant, exhausting effort of pulling each foot free from the clinging morass. The simple act of walking becomes easy again, and it feels like a small miracle. The water in the shell craters freezes over, forming thin sheets of ice that glitter in the weak winter sunlight. The barbed wire becomes decorated with frost, each strand outlined in delicate white crystals that catch the light. The broken tree stumps in no man's land, blackened and shattered by artillery, are transformed into sculptures of ice. Even the rats, those constant, unwelcome companions of trench life, seem less active in the cold, retreating to whatever dark holes they call home. For a brief moment, the misery of the trenches is replaced by something almost beautiful. The battlefield is transformed into a winter scene, silent and still under a blanket of frost. You stand at the fire step during the morning stand too, and find yourself momentarily transfixed by the sight. The low sun, pale and weak but present for the first time in what feels like forever, casts long shadows across no man's land. The frost sparkles like scattered diamonds. For just a moment, you can almost forget that this beautiful landscape is a place of death. But more importantly than the weather, the mood among the men begins to change. It starts with the mail. The military postal service, despite the chaos of war, operates with remarkable efficiency. Letters from home arrive with surprising regularity, carried by ship across the channel, by train to the rear areas, and then by horse-drawn cart and on foot to the front lines. For men living in conditions of unimaginable hardship, these letters are a lifeline to the world they left behind. You receive a letter from your mother. You recognize her handwriting on the envelope immediately. You've been holding it for hours, almost afraid to open it, wanting to save it, to preserve this moment of connection. When you finally tear it open with cold, fumbling fingers, the familiar scent of home seems to rise from the paper, lavender perhaps, or just the smell of her writing desk. She writes about ordinary things, the weather in England, a neighbour's new baby, the cat's adventures, your father's work. She does not mention the war directly. She does not speak of fear or worry, though you know both must be constant companions for her. Instead, she writes as if you're simply away on a long journey and will be home soon. She ends the letter as she always does. We pray for you every night and know that God will keep you safe. Your loving mother. You fold the letter carefully and tuck it into your breast pocket, close to your heart. You've read it 3 times already and will read it many more before the paper wears thin and the words fade. But letters are not the only things arriving from home. Parcels begin to appear, shipped by families, churches, charitable organisations, and patriotic societies back in Britain. The arrival of a parcel is a major event in the otherwise monotonous routine of trench life. Men gather around as each one is opened, sharing in the recipient's good fortune. Inside are small luxuries that seem almost unimaginable in the context of the trenches. Tins of biscuits, real biscuits with sugar and butter, not the rock-hard military issue. Bars of chocolate, rich and sweet. Cakes baked by mothers and sisters, somehow surviving the journey mostly intact. Cigarettes, the preferred currency of the trenches. Warm, thick woolen socks, hand-knitted with love. Small personal items. A new pipe, a harmonica, a deck of playing cards, a book. One of the most significant arrivals is Princess Mary's gift. The King's daughter has arranged for a special brass box to be sent to every soldier and sailor serving at the front for Christmas. When yours arrives, you turn it over in your hands, marvelling at the craftsmanship. The lid is embossed with a profile of the princess herself, surrounded by the names of the allied nations. You pry it open with careful fingers and find it packed with gifts. Cigarettes, tobacco, a Christmas card with a message from the princess, and a picture of King George V, and a small bullet pencil. It is a small gesture perhaps, but its meaning is profound. It reminds you that somewhere, far away from this frozen hell, people still remember you. People still care that you exist. You are not forgotten. These parcels and letters do more than provide material comfort. They reconnect you to the world beyond the trenches. They remind you that there is still a home to go back to, a life beyond this war, and they make you think about Christmas. Christmas, which is rapidly approaching. Christmas, which you always celebrated at home with your family. Christmas, which last year was warm and bright and full of laughter, and which this year will be spent in a frozen ditch in Belgium, facing an enemy who is probably thinking exactly the same thoughts. And this, inevitably, makes you think about the men in the trenches across no man's land. You think about the Germans, they are the enemy, the Hun, the barbarous invaders. This is what the propaganda posters say. This is what the newspapers call them. But you have been close enough to see them. During the rare moments of daylight calm, when artillery is silent and snipers are resting, you have cautiously peered over the parapet and observed the German trenches through the periscope, and what you have seen are men, just men, soldiers like yourself, moving about their business, working on their trenches, cooking their food, going about the same daily routines that fill your own days. You have heard them too. Sound carries strangely across no man's land, especially at night when all is quiet. You have heard German voices calling to each other, laughing at some joke, singing songs. The words are incomprehensible to you, but the tone, the emotions are universal. These are not monsters. These are men, far from their homes, enduring the same cold, the same fear, the same miserable conditions as you. And now, as Christmas approaches, you wonder, are they also receiving letters and parcels from home? Are they also thinking about their families? Are they also remembering Christmases past and dreading the one to come? The answer, of course, is yes. They are experiencing exactly what you are experiencing. The German High Command, like the British, has arranged for special Christmas parcels to be sent to the troops. German families are writing letters to their sons, brothers, and fathers at the front, filling them with the same mixture of love, worry, and forced cheerfulness that fills the letter in your pocket. This shared experience, this common humanity, begins to create a subtle shift in how you think about the enemy. They are still the enemy. You are still at war. If ordered to attack their trenches tomorrow, you would do so. If they attacked yours, you would fight them to the death. This has not changed, but somewhere in the back of your mind, a small seed of doubt has been planted. If these men are so much like you, if they love their families and miss their homes and celebrate the same holidays, then what exactly are you fighting for? What is the point of all this death? These are dangerous thoughts, subversive thoughts. You do not voice them aloud. To do so would be to risk accusations of cowardice or disloyalty, but you are not alone in thinking them. All around you, in quiet conversations and knowing glances, you can see that other men are having the same uncomfortable realizations. The war has been going on for 4 months now, and the initial enthusiasm, the patriotic fervor, has long since been ground down by the reality of the trenches. What remains is simply the stubborn determination to endure, to survive, and to do one's duty. But beneath that, doubt is growing. On the night of December 24th, Christmas Eve, something extraordinary begins to happen. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly, as the sun sets and darkness falls over the battlefield. The day has been quiet, unusually so. There has been sporadic rifle fire, the occasional distant thump of artillery, but nothing like the usual intensity. It's as if both sides, exhausted after months of continuous combat, have tacitly agreed to a day of rest. Or perhaps it's simply that everyone is thinking about home, about Christmas, about anything other than the war. You are huddled in your section of the trench as the last light fades from the sky. The temperature is dropping rapidly, and you pull your greatcoat tighter around your shoulders, though it does little to keep out the penetrating cold. Around you, other men are doing the same, settling in for what promises to be a long, cold night. There is little conversation. Everyone is lost in their own thoughts, their own memories of Christmases past. And then, cutting through the silence of the winter night, you hear it, singing. At first, you think you're imagining it, that your exhausted mind is playing tricks on you, conjuring sounds from nothing. You shake your head, trying to clear it. But no, the sound persists. It's real, and it's coming from the German trenches. You strain your ears, listening intently. The singing grows louder, more distinct. You can make out individual voices now, hundreds of them, joined together in harmony. The melody is hauntingly beautiful, rising and falling in the cold night air. And then you recognize it. The tune is familiar, achingly familiar, though the words are in German. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, silent night, holy night. The sound carries across no man's land with perfect clarity. In the cold, still air, with no wind to disperse it, the singing seems to fill the entire world. You find yourself standing motionless, barely breathing, transfixed by what you're hearing. All around you, other men are doing the same. Some are climbing up onto the fire step to hear better. The sergeant, who would normally bark at them to get down, says nothing. He too is listening. The Germans are singing with their whole hearts. This is not a drunken soldier's song, not a marching song or a bawdy tune. This is something sacred, something profound. You can hear the emotion in their voices, the longing, the sadness, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, this war will end and they will return to their homes and families. The carol speaks of peace, of silent nights and holy nights, of a mother and her child. It speaks of everything that war is not. When the first verse ends, there is a brief pause, and then the Germans begin the second verse. The melody continues, beautiful and heartbreaking. You realize that tears are running down your face, freezing on your cheeks in the bitter cold. You are not alone. All around you, hardened soldiers, men who have survived months of the worst fighting the world has ever seen, are weeping openly. And then someone in your trench begins to sing. You don't know who starts it. It might be Private Evans, the Welshman with the beautiful tenor voice, or it might be Corporal Thompson, who sang in his church choir back home. But whoever it is, they begin to sing the same carol in English. Silent night, holy night. Their voice is uncertain at first, wavering as if they're not sure they should be doing this. But then others join in. One voice becomes 2, then 5, then 10, then 100. Soon your entire section of trench is singing, voices raised in unison. The effect is magical, transcendent. Two armies, enemies who have been killing each other for months, are now singing the same song together. The melodies intertwine, the German and English lyrics overlapping, creating a strange and beautiful harmony. The singing echoes across the frozen battlefield, filling the night. For this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment, there is no war. There is only music and the shared human longing for peace, for home, for something better than this. The carol ends, and for a long moment there is absolute silence, not the tense, fearful silence of war, where you wait for the next shell to fall or the next shot to ring out. This is a different kind of silence, a reverent silence, as if the entire battlefield is holding its breath. Then, breaking the silence, a voice calls out from the German trenches. It's loud, clear, and speaks in heavily accented but understandable English. Merry Christmas, Tommy. The use of your nickname, the British soldier's name, is oddly familiar, almost friendly. For a moment, no one responds. Everyone is too stunned, too uncertain of what is happening. And then someone, probably the same soldier who started the singing, shouts back, "Merry Christmas, Fritz." His voice cracks with emotion, but the words are clear, and just like that, something fundamental shifts. The invisible barrier between the two sides, the barrier of hatred and fear and dehumanization that has been so carefully constructed by propaganda and military discipline, begins to crack. These men, British and German, are not faceless enemies anymore. They are soldiers, far from home, sharing a moment of common humanity on Christmas Eve. More voices join in, from both sides. Happy Christmas! Frohe Weihnachten! God bless you! The words fly back and forth across no man's land, and then, incredibly, wonderfully, the singing begins again. This time, it's a different carol. The Germans start with O Tannenbaum, their voices confident and strong. Your men respond with O Christmas Tree, the English version of the same song. Then come other carols, each side taking turns or singing together. The first Noel, Adeste Fideles, which both sides sing in Latin, the universal language of the Church. Hark, the herald angels sing. The night becomes a spontaneous concert, a Christmas celebration unlike any other in history. Men who cannot speak each other's languages find a common tongue in music. The songs speak of peace on earth, of goodwill toward men, of a Saviour born to bring salvation to all. In the middle of the most terrible war the world has ever known, these messages take on a meaning that is almost overwhelming. And then, slowly, carefully, men begin to show themselves. In the German trenches, small lights appear, candles, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. The Germans have brought small Christmas trees to the front lines. Tiny fir saplings barely 2 feet tall, and they have decorated them with candles and placed them along the top of their trenches. It is a sight of surreal, heartbreaking beauty. The flickering candle flames reflect off the frost and ice, turning the battlefield into something that looks almost like a scene from a Christmas card. You peer over the parapet, no longer worried about snipers, and see the lights spread out along the German line as far as you can see. Other men are doing the same, standing openly in their trenches, watching the spectacle unfold. Some of the Germans are standing on their fire steps, visible as silhouettes against the candlelight, waving. You find yourself waving back, an automatic, almost unconscious gesture of friendliness. The singing continues for hours. New carols, old carols, soldiers' songs transformed into Christmas songs. It's a long way to Tipperary from the British side, answered by Die Wacht am Rhein from the Germans. The mood is no longer somber. It's becoming almost festive. There is laughter now, jokes shouted across no man's land that no one quite understands, but that everyone finds funny anyway. As midnight approaches, the singing gradually winds down. Voices grow hoarse. The cold is becoming unbearable, even for men who have endured months of it. But no one wants this night to end. This brief glimpse of humanity, of normalcy, of the world as it should be rather than as it is too precious to let go. Finally, as the last carol fades away into the night, there is one final exchange. A German voice, speaking clearly in English, calls out, "Good night, Tommy. Sleep well. Tomorrow we will meet." A British voice responds, "Good night, Fritz. See you tomorrow." And then, remarkably, both sides actually honour this impromptu agreement. For the first time in months, the night passes without a single shot being fired. No artillery barrage, no sniper fire, no raid. The battlefield is silent except for the occasional cough, the creak of wood, the rustle of men settling in to sleep. You lie down in your dugout, wrapped in your blanket, your mind racing. Tomorrow we will meet. What did that mean? Would the Germans attack? Should you attack them? Or did it mean something else entirely? Sleep comes slowly, fitfully, but when it does, for the first time in a very long time, you do not dream of death. When dawn breaks on December 25th, Christmas morning, the impossible becomes real. You stand on the fire step at stand 2, as you do every morning, expecting nothing unusual, but instead of the grey, empty expanse of no man's land, you see movement, figures, men standing upright, walking, not attacking, just walking, and they are German soldiers. There is a moment of shock, confusion, and fear. Is this a trick? An attack disguised as something else? But no, the Germans are not carrying rifles. They are waving, calling out, "Don't shoot, don't shoot. We come in peace. Merry Christmas." Your officer, a young lieutenant barely older than you, is faced with an impossible decision. He has no orders for this, no protocol, but he makes a choice. He climbs out of the trench. He stands in the open, exposed and vulnerable, and he begins to walk toward the German line. And you follow. One by one, the men of your section climb over the parapet and step into no man's land. You are terrified. Every instinct, every lesson from months of war screams at you that this is insane. But you do it anyway. You walk across the frozen mud, past the craters, past the wire, toward the men you were shooting at just yesterday. And then you meet them, face to face, up close. The Germans look exactly like you. Young men, some with beards, some clean-shaven, wearing grey-green uniforms instead of khaki, but otherwise unremarkable, ordinary, human. One of them, a tall soldier with a wide smile, extends his hand. You hesitate for just a moment, and then you shake it. His grip is firm and warm. He grins and says in broken English, "Hello, Tommy. Good morning. Happy Christmas." The floodgates open. All along this section of the front, soldiers from both sides pour into no man's land. Hundreds of men, enemies just hours before, are now standing together in the open, talking, laughing, sharing cigarettes, and showing each other photographs of families back home. You cannot speak German, and the man you're talking to speaks only a little English, but somehow you communicate. Through gestures, smiles, and the few shared words, you learn his name. His home is in Bavaria. He has a wife and a young daughter. He shows you a creased photograph, a pretty woman holding a baby. You show him a picture of your own family, your parents standing outside your house in Manchester. He nods approvingly and smiles. Someone produces a football, a simple leather ball, slightly deflated, brought from the British trenches. Within minutes, an impromptu game is organised. Caps and helmets are piled up to mark the goals. Teams are formed. British versus German, though the sides are chaotic, and no one is keeping score with any seriousness. The game is clumsy, played on frozen, uneven ground pocked with shell holes, but it is joyful. Men are running, shouting, laughing. For a brief moment, the war disappears. You are not soldiers. You are just young men playing a game on a cold winter morning. The scene is repeated in dozens of places along the front. In some sectors, the truce is limited to a brief exchange of greetings and a cessation of fire. In others, it lasts all day. Men venture deeper into no man's land, helping each other bury the dead who have been lying in the open for weeks. Bodies are retrieved, identified if possible, and given hasty but dignified burials in shallow graves marked with simple wooden crosses. British and German chaplains sometimes stand side by side, offering prayers in their respective languages. It is an act of shared humanity, an acknowledgement that even in war, some things are sacred. Gifts are exchanged. The British share their tins of bully beef, their cigarettes, and their rum ration. The Germans offer sausages, chocolate, and bottles of schnapps. Soldiers trade uniform buttons and cap badges as souvenirs. You end up with a German belt buckle embossed with the Imperial German eagle, which you tuck into your pocket, a tangible proof that this surreal day actually happened. As the day wears on, the initial excitement gives way to something quieter and more profound. You find yourself sitting on the edge of a shell crater with a small group of Germans and British soldiers passing a bottle of schnapps back and forth. The conversation is halting and awkward, a mix of broken English, broken German, and a great deal of pantomime, but the mood is warm. One of the Germans, an older man with a thick moustache, produces a harmonica and begins to play. The tune is melancholy and beautiful. The other men listen in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. You realize, in that moment, that these men are not monsters. They are not the savage Huns that the propaganda posters back home depict. They are men just like you. They did not choose this war. They are here because they were ordered to be here, because their country called them, because they had no choice. They have families, homes, and dreams. They want the same things you want: to survive, to return home, to live a normal life. And the terrible, unspoken question hangs in the air. If we can sit together like this, share food and drink, laugh and sing, then why are we fighting? What is the point of all this death? But the answer, of course, is that the decision is not yours to make. You are not the generals, not the politicians, not the kings. You are just a private soldier, and when the truce ends, you will return to your trench, pick up your rifle, and resume the war, because that is what you have been ordered to do. As the sun begins to set on Christmas Day, the reality of the situation starts to reassert itself. Officers on both sides, many of whom disapproved of the fraternization from the start, begin to call their men back. The higher command is furious. Word of the truce has reached headquarters, and urgent orders are being issued to restore discipline and resume hostilities. This spontaneous peace is not part of the plan. It is dangerous. It undermines the entire war effort. If soldiers on both sides refuse to fight, the war cannot continue. Reluctantly, you and the other men begin to say your goodbyes. Hands are shaken again. Addresses are exchanged, though you know deep down that you will never write those letters. The German soldier you've been talking to, the one with the photograph of his wife and daughter, clasps your hand one last time. "Good luck, Tommy," he says quietly. "I hope you go home safe." You nod, unable to find the words to respond. You too, Fritz. You finally manage. You walk back across no man's land, climbing down into your trench. The familiar, muddy world closes around you again. The brief window of light and warmth is over. You are back in the war. For a day or two, the truce holds in some places. There is an unspoken agreement. We will not shoot if you do not shoot. But it cannot last. On December 26th and 27th, the pressure from above becomes too great. Artillery batteries, which had remained silent, are ordered to resume firing. Snipers are commanded to take up their positions again. In some sectors, junior officers, unwilling to force their men to shoot at friends they made just yesterday, order their soldiers to fire deliberately high, to send bullets whistling harmlessly over the German trenches as a warning that the truce is ending. But gradually, inevitably, the war returns in full. The machine guns open up, the shells begin to fall. No man's land, which for one miraculous day had been a place of fellowship, becomes once again a place of death. And yet, the memory of the Christmas truce endures. For the soldiers who experienced it, the truce was a defining moment, a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. Letters home describe the event in awed, almost disbelieving tones. "It was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen," one British soldier wrote to his family. "I would not have believed it if I had not been there myself." The press, at first, tried to suppress the story. Military censors were wary of any narrative that might undermine public support for the war. But too many letters were sent, too many witnesses spoke, and the truth could not be contained. By early January, newspapers in Britain and Germany began to publish accounts of the truce, often framed as heartwarming human interest stories, carefully avoiding any suggestion that it undermined the righteousness of the war effort. The generals and the politicians were not heartwarmed, they were horrified. The Christmas truce represented everything they feared: a breakdown of discipline, a recognition of the enemy's humanity, and a dangerous precedent. Orders were issued. Fraternization with the enemy was strictly forbidden. Officers were warned that if any similar incident occurred, they would face court-martial. In future Christmases, the High Command made certain that the front lines were kept active. Artillery bombardments were scheduled. Raids were ordered. The soldiers were kept busy, too exhausted and too frightened to contemplate peace. And it worked. The Christmas Truce of 1914 was never repeated. There were a few small, isolated incidents in the following years, brief pauses in the fighting, but nothing on the scale of that first Christmas. The war ground on. The idealism and naivety of 1914 gave way to the grim, hardened reality of 1915, 1916, and 1917. The soldiers who had sung carols together and played football in no man's land learned to hate each other, or at least learned to see each other as abstractions, targets to be destroyed rather than men to be understood. Many of the men who participated in the Christmas truce did not survive the war. The slaughter of the Somme, Passchendaele, and Verdun claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. It is entirely possible, even likely, that soldiers who shook hands on Christmas Day 1914 later killed each other in the brutal battles that followed. The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas lasted 4 more years, and by the time it ended in November 1918, the world had changed forever. But the story of the Christmas truce did not die with those soldiers. It lived on, passed down through families, recorded in letters and diaries, and eventually enshrined in the collective memory of the war. It became a symbol, a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments of human conflict, the capacity for compassion, for empathy, for peace still exists. In the decades that followed, the Christmas truce became the subject of books, films, and documentaries. It was dramatized, romanticized, and sometimes exaggerated. The football match, in particular, became a legendary image, though historians debate how widespread the games actually were. Some accounts suggest only a few small kickabouts occurred. Others describe organized matches with makeshift goalposts and cheering crowds. The truth, as is often the case with history, is probably somewhere in between. What is undeniable is the truce itself. It happened. Thousands of soldiers on both sides made the choice to stop fighting, to climb out of their trenches, and to meet their enemies as fellow human beings. It was not ordered from above. It was not part of any military strategy. It was a spontaneous act of rebellion against the logic of war, a refusal, however brief, to accept that killing each other was the only possible relationship between them. The Christmas truce stands as a powerful counterpoint to the narrative of World War I as an unstoppable machine of death. It reminds us that the men who fought were not automatons. They were individuals with agency, capable of making choices, even in the most constrained circumstances. And in that moment, they chose peace. The truce also raises profound questions about the nature of war itself. If enemies can lay down their arms, share food and drink, play games, and recognize each other's humanity, then what justifies the continuation of the conflict? The answer, uncomfortable as it is that war is not truly fought between individual soldiers. It is fought between nations, ideologies, and interests far removed from the frozen fields of Belgium. The soldiers are merely the instruments. The tragedy of the Christmas Truce is that it demonstrated the possibility of peace while simultaneously revealing its impossibility. The men in the trenches were willing to stop fighting, but the forces that had put them there were not. In the modern world, the Christmas Truce has taken on an almost mythical quality. It is invoked in times of conflict as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even enemies can find common ground. It appears in Christmas advertisements, in songs, and in stories told to children. Some of this is sentimentality, a desire to find a moment of light in the darkness of the Great War, but there is also a deeper truth at work. The Christmas Truce matters because it shows us what is possible. It shows us that the barriers we construct between us and them, between friend and enemy, are not as solid as we believe. They can be crossed, they can be dissolved, even if only for a day. Of course, the story also has a tragic dimension. The fact that the Christmas Truce was never repeated, that the war continued for 4 more years with ever-increasing brutality, suggests that the forces driving the conflict were stronger than the momentary compassion of the soldiers. The machine of war, once set in motion, is almost impossible to stop. The generals learned from 1914. They made sure that future Christmases would be filled with artillery fire, not carols. They understood that if soldiers saw their enemies as human beings, the war could not continue. And yet, the memory persists. Every year, as December approaches, the story of the Christmas Truce is retold. Ceremonies are held at memorials along the old Western Front. Historians give lectures, filmmakers produce documentaries, and ordinary people, moved by the story, pause to reflect on what it means. In a world still riven by conflict, still plagued by war, the Christmas Truce offers a fragile but enduring message that peace is possible if only we have the courage to reach out, to sing together, to lay down our weapons, if only for a moment. The trenches are gone now, filled in long ago, the land reclaimed by farmers. The shell craters have been smoothed over, the barbed wire has rusted away. The men who were there, both British and German, are all long dead. But the story remains. And every Christmas, when the world grows cold and the nights grow long, we remember those young men standing in no man's land, shaking hands, sharing songs, and proving, however briefly, that even in the midst of the worst war humanity had ever seen, the light of human decency could still shine through. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to that extraordinary Christmas over a century ago. I hope the story of the men who chose peace, if only for a day, has moved you as much as it has moved me. From the frozen trenches of 1914 to wherever you are tonight, I wish you a calm and peaceful night and a very Merry Christmas.